I think it would be amazing to be a student at Hogwarts School of Wizardry. For those of you who have read the Harry Potter books, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, sure, the students' lives may have been endangered on multiple occasions, and there was always the looming threat of a Dark Lord taking over the world, but the classes themselves sound like a lot of fun. Most of the classes were hands-on opportunities for the students to do things. Imagine going to a school where one day you were outside feeding a baby unicorn, while another day you were learning how to levitate objects. Even Severus Snape divided his class into small groups and had them brew their own concoctions like shrinking solutions or wit sharpening potions. Way cooler than anything I did in my high school chemistry class. The one class at Hogwarts I would hate to take would be History of Magic by Professor Binns. Not because of the subject, but because of the teacher. If you remember, Professor Binns was a ghost who one day died in his sleep during a break between classes, but still continued to teach as if nothing had changed. The books describe how he read in a flat drone like an old vacuum cleaner until nearly everyone in the class fell asleep. Only Hermione seemed to be immune to his mind-numbing style of lecture. Professor Binns discouraged questions, had trouble remembering his students' names, and could likely teach an entire lesson and it wouldn't even matter if students were in the room. Have you ever been in a class like that? More importantly, have you ever taught a lesson like that? Today, we're going to discuss principles of student engagement that will help you to overcome the sage on the stage mentality that sadly puts many real-life students to sleep as if by magic. Let's begin with a revelation that Joseph Smith received in December 1832. Part of this revelation gave instructions to what the Lord called the School of the Prophets. The directions summarize the Lord's law of learning. They read, "Appoint among yourselves a teacher, and let not all be spokesmen at once, but let one speak at a time, and let all listen unto his sayings, that when all have spoken, that all may be edified of all, and that every man may have an equal privilege." Notice there is a clear expectation of a teacher, but the teacher is there to provide structure and organization, not to be the fount of all knowledge. Instead, the word all shows up 5 times in this verse. The Lord's expectation in a gospel-oriented class is that everybody speaks and everybody listens. There are multiple reasons for this. President Boyd K. Packer taught that revelation is scattered among us. Each person brings to the table their own background, experiences, insights, ideas, and perspectives. When these are openly shared, the sum is greater than the individual parts. The brilliance of councils and classes in the church is not that we all think the same, but that we all think differently. When it comes to the Lord's Law of Learning in D&C 88, we can actually summarize it in 2 words: involve and engage. They are synonyms. They are also action verbs for things that you as a teacher need to do with your students throughout each lesson. This micro-training will highlight 9 principles of engaging teaching that you can use today to make your lessons more magical. First, create an atmosphere of collaboration. Enter class with an attitude of learning from and about the fellow learners in your class. This means actively listening more than you talk, and if necessary, deliberately teaching your students their own role in learning. Elder Jeffrey R. Holland taught, "I make no attempt to say who has the greater responsibility, the teacher or the student. I just know there is significant responsibility on the shoulders of both." As a rule, teachers probably try harder than the students. They know they have responsibility, but so do the students. We must change the attitude of students, older as well as younger, who think, "I'm going to wander into class and sit in the back row. I haven't read the assignment. I haven't given any thought to anything. I haven't prayed for myself or for the teacher. I'll just sit here and challenge the teacher to get through to me." We have not thought urgently enough about the responsibility a student bears in the learning process. Second, give homework. Now, I'm not talking about assigning your class research papers or busy work, but communicate clear expectations that each student will read the material prior to the lesson and be ready to discuss. Ask students to come prepared to share things they learn or their experiences in applying a particular principle. For some lessons, you might even ask a student in advance to help teach a portion of the lesson by sharing an insight or personal experience. This gives them time to think about and prepare something that will benefit the whole class, including them. In successive lessons, follow up with any challenges or applications from the previous week. Third, ask well-crafted questions. President Henry B. Eyring said, "To ask and to answer questions is at the heart of all learning and all teaching." It is worth great effort to carefully craft questions during lesson preparation that will lead to understanding and engage the minds and hearts of the students as they learn. When planning questions, we should first determine the purpose for which we are asking a particular question. We should then thoughtfully design the question with that purpose in mind. A few carefully chosen words can make a great difference. If the answer to a question is found in a verse or a quote, use the ask, read, ask method. Tell the students what they are looking for or should be thinking about before you have them read. This sets them up to succeed. Don't read first, ask questions later. You also want to avoid guess what the teacher is thinking questions. Questions that make it feel like you're looking for a specific answer, even though there might be many ways of thinking about it. Fourth, encourage multiple answers per question. Ask questions in a way that invites everyone to think about the answer. While some fact-based questions might have only one answer, the deeper questions that invite students to analyze, relate, or testify might have as many right answers as there are people in the room. After a student answers one of these questions, don't be afraid to follow up by asking the entire class, "Who can add to that comment?" or "What other insights do you see?" Occasionally, I've used a teaching technique that facilitates this very well, one that I call "Everybody Up." Students will silently prepare an answer to a question which may include a list of more than one thing. Then, the whole class stands and I call on individual students to share one thing. The rule is, if a student still has something different on their list, they stay standing. If everything on their list has been shared, they sit down. I then call on standing students until everyone has taken their seat. Fifth, don't be afraid of silence. Elder Neal A. Maxwell once counseled teachers, provide moments of deliberate pause. The Spirit will supply its own evidence of things not seen. He called these inspired silences. Novice teachers will often answer their own question just to fill such silences, effectively shutting off discussion. Expert teachers know that it takes a few moments for a student to distill their thoughts about a well-crafted question. They embrace the quiet moments in a class as students prepare answers that are more than surface-level responses. 6. Don't answer every question. Put the ball back in their own court. When Jesus was asked by a man, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus responded, "What is written in the law? How readest thou?" He listened to the man's response, which was followed up by another question, "And who is my neighbor?" Once again, instead of answering the question, he returned it back to the man. Christ told the story of the Good Samaritan and asked, "Which now of these three, thinkest thou, was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves?" He helped the man to answer his own questions. Similarly, I find it fascinating that when the brother of Jared came to the Lord with a concern about crossing the ocean without any light in their barges, the Lord reflected the brother of Jared's question back at him. "What will ye that I should prepare for you?" The Lord gave the brother of Jared the opportunity to come up with his own solution, a solution so unique and creative that it would take thousands and thousands of years for someone to envision anything similar. In effect, the brother of Jared invented the light bulb millennia before Thomas Edison got around to it. Naturally, the Lord could have just told the Jaredites what to do. They would have done it, happily. For that matter, the Lord could have flown the Jaredites to the Promised Land in flaming chariots and saved them the trouble of crossing the ocean in the first place. But he didn't. For God, the journey is just as important as the destination. 7th, class-wide surveys can be a quick way to involve and engage a class. These can take many different forms. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or raising hands, or response cards can all work. For example, raise a red card for faith, a yellow card for hope, or a blue card for charity. Surveys and straw polls immediately invite everyone in class in an easy, non-threatening way to be part of the lesson. Even nonverbal or shy students can feel a part of the discussion. 8th, invite written responses. For meaningful questions, giving students time to craft their response in writing also makes it easier for them to share. Students can write in response journals or on pre-designed handouts. You can also invite students to write on sticky notes and post them at the front of the class, or write short answers on the board. Students can even text their responses to an individual or a designed survey app. Written doesn't necessarily mean long. Finally, get students to talk with each other. considerable research has shown that students are more likely to feel comfortable sharing ideas in informal, small group settings than they would in front of an entire class, crowd, or congregation. You can deliberately facilitate this by breaking up the students into small groups or pairs. Provide some organization that makes this easy. Inviting students to form their own groups can feel awkward and invariably leaves out students who might not be picked. One way to leverage small group discussions is what is called the ripple. Students are invited to individually think about the answer to a question. They then share their responses in prearranged pairs or small groups. Then, to bring the class back together, the teacher invites volunteers to share what they learned with the whole class. Now, with this list, there are a few words of caution that could be worth sharing here. First, there is a danger to dismiss this whole discussion with a wave of the hand saying, "I'm already doing that," when in fact, student involvement and engagement is still minimal in our lessons. Oftentimes, teachers feel they're involving their students, even if student involvement is limited to reading out loud scriptures, quotes, or PowerPoint slides. I remember learning early in my experiences as a teacher that an engaging lesson plan is often filled with phrases that begin with "the students will" instead of "the teacher will." I found myself writing "the students will" so much that I began to abbreviate it, TSW. But if the majority of these statements in my lesson plan sound like "the students will listen to the teacher" or "the students will read quote number 3 from the handout," then this is not involving them. They're not learning from each other. They're still learning from the teacher. Another danger of misapplying the Lord's law of learning is when the teacher designs an activity that then takes over the lesson. Sometimes a teacher builds a lesson around an activity that invites total participation from all students, but the participation stays superficial. The students are interacting with each other and enjoying themselves, but not meaningfully engaging with the content of the lesson. Remember, D&C 88 verse 122 says, "Let one speak at a time, and let all listen unto his sayings, that when all has spoken, that all may be edified of all." Participation is more than talking. It is about sharing and connecting with each other to the point that edification, spirit-directed learning, happens. A final danger is to remove the teacher from the equation altogether. Should a lesson be student-focused? Of course. But don't forget that D&C 88 verse 122 begins with the phrase, "Appoint among yourselves a teacher." There is natural balance that must be struck. Researchers have shown that on average, the optimal ratio of student talk to teacher talk in a lesson should be between 70-30 and 80-20, with the students taking up 70 to 80% of the time. Naturally, depending on the content of the lesson, this might vary. The teacher must be there to provide structure and create an atmosphere of collaborative learning. But the teacher is also there to provide content, context, and grounded answers that lead the students toward Christ. When Philip approached the Ethiopian eunuch on the road to Gaza, Philip ran toward him and heard the eunuch read a passage from Isaiah. When Philip asked him, "Understandest thou what thou readest?" the Ethiopian replied, "How can I, except some man should guide me?" Had Philip peppered the eunuch with questions or invited him to pair share something he didn't understand in the first place, this would not have been effective teaching. It was teacher time. Philip needed to testify of Christ. If done right, the Lord's law of involving and engaging students can have staggering results in a class. Even in public education, involving and engaging students has been shown to have wide-ranging effects. It allows the teacher to gauge the effectiveness of his or her teaching to see if the students are really getting it. Involving students drastically increases the chance that students will remember the lesson for more than just the next 24 hours or 24 minutes. Making the students an active part of the lesson keeps students alert and focused, and even increases the social connectedness, the sense of belonging that students have in a class. In gospel-oriented settings, the Lord's law of involving and engaging students has even greater results. D&C 43 verses 8 and 9 reads, "I give unto you a commandment, that when ye are assembled together, ye shall instruct and edify each other, that ye may know how to act and direct my church, how to act upon the points of my law and commandments which I have given you. And thus ye shall become instructed in the law of my church, and be sanctified by that which ye have received. And ye shall bind yourselves to act in all holiness before me." In other words, involving and engaging students means they will not only be instructed and apply the principles in their lives, they will be sanctified, connected by covenants, and made more holy. Now, as the Savior said at the end of the parable of the Good Samaritan, it is time for you to go and do thou likewise. Take some of the principles from this microtraining and find a way to incorporate them into your upcoming lessons. In the end, instead of merely levitating objects like you might see in a classroom at Hogwarts, we elevate people. That is the magic of involving and engaging students in a Christ-centered class.